Welcome everybody, and I'd like to thank you for attending this update that I'm providing. So we've been, ELISA has been working on a white paper specific to what I call basic safety applications in which Linux is being used for, goodness, probably about a year and a half now. And I'll explain a little bit more about what that means in a couple of slides. So I'll provide an update on the status of this white paper. So for those of you who do not know me, my name is Jason Smith. I work for a company called UL. It's a testing, inspection, and certification company. It's global, but is primarily based in North America. I personally am based in the Chicago area in Illinois in the United States. I've been at UL for almost 16 years. Currently, I'm principal engineer for robotics and control systems at UL. So I'm particularly interested in Linux being used in safety applications. Obviously, my current interest is in seeing it more and more often in robotics, but generally everywhere in safety applications. And so just generally speaking, I have over 20 years of experience in embedded systems and software development. Basically, I'm 43 years old, but I think I learned how to program a computer or write programs in BASIC right around the same time that I learned how to start writing my name. So yeah, so this is obviously a very interesting topic for me. So I come from the certification background. I actually do not come so much from the Linux background. I know obviously some about Linux, but I am by no means an expert in Linux. So for those of you who have attended the last few workshops, the first part of this update is going to be pretty similar to what you've seen in the last few updates that I've done during some of the other workshops. I'll just give a recap on this white paper. What were the goals, where we're at. The second part of this update, I'm begging people to please help me finish this white paper. So what I'm planning on doing the second part of this half an hour is having an open discussion on some of the ways, some of the things that I can do or we can do to add to this white paper to make it useful and really kind of get it, at least a draft of this completed, and then it can go on and be updated further on. But yeah, as I mentioned, many of you who have sat through this update previous workshops, the first part of this is going to be pretty similar to what I'd presented before. So a quick recap, particularly for those of you who are not familiar with this or are new to ELISA or new to this activity. The target of this particular white paper. So I'm seeing as a certification engineer, two different ways that Linux is being used in safety applications. First of all, I see Linux being used in safety applications where the safety itself is very, very complex, whether it be autonomy, intended functions, self-driving cars, potentially robotics and things like that, where the actual function, which is safety related, is very, very complex and requires an operating system. This white paper is actually not targeting the automotive sector. It's not targeting robotics in particular, at least very complex, maybe more simple robots. This white paper is more targeting end applications that themselves may be complex, but the end application itself is not safety related. But now that embedded system is being asked to perform some very basic safety functions in addition to its overall non-safety related function. So maybe it's doing some voltage or current or temperature monitoring, something like that. Um, so in both of these instances, that safety related function, whatever it may be, very, very complex or very, very simple, likely is going to require some sort of compliance or conformance to a functional safety standard. And again, what I'm saying, or what this white paper is targeting, is not the not the automotive self-driving cars. It's the simpler safety functions. I'll give a few examples of that. Um, so some of the things that could likely be in scope. Let's say you have um, a television, an HDTV that is mainly doing the non-safety function, which is communication, displaying an image, but now it's also monitoring maybe a temperature sensor or something like that, making sure that the TV itself is not getting too hot and not presenting a fire hazard. You might have a printer that has motors in it, that if the motors were, for example, there was a paper jam and the motors kept trying to push the paper through, the motors themselves could get too hot and pose a fire hazard. Another example would be, uh, say, in cooking or in appliances, where you might have a touch interface where to turn on or off, like an induction cooktop, and you don't want that to accidentally turn on. So maybe the software or whatnot that's being used to detect a button press, that might be also an example. What we're not targeting, again, I mentioned automotive self-driving cars. We're not targeting that. We're not targeting avionics. We're not targeting nuclear power plants or fuel processing or things like that. So what were the goals of this white paper? So the safety standards that are most likely going to apply, or functional safety standards that are likely going to apply to these more simple safety functions, are not your ISO 26262s or IEC 61508s. There are other standards like UL 1998 and IEC 62304. Now, these standards take a different approach to off-the-shelf software or software of unknown provenance, which would be what Linux is considered in that context. You have a manufacturer that's writing an application. They want to use Linux. Linux was not developed by the manufacturer. The manufacturer really doesn't know how appropriate or how good or how bad Linux is going to be for that application. So these standards, UL 1998 and IEC 62304, as examples, have provisions to allow use of those pieces of software, like potentially Linux, without requiring any sort of certification or any sort of really any much of a qualification of those pieces of software. But they do have requirements for that software and then for the overall application to mitigate failure of the off-the-shelf software or software of unknown provenance. And so that's kind of what the goal of this white paper is to explain those requirements and then to point software developers to available resources, whether they be online or whatnot, to help them achieve their conformance and compliance to those standards. And one additional caveat, this white paper is not intended to be a solution to certify Linux or to claim that it is safe. That's not the purpose of this white paper. Where are we at with this white paper? As I mentioned, we've been working on it on and off for the past year and a half. I won't necessarily go through all of these in general, but you can take a read through this. We started off kind of just one standard, and we've additionally built in other standards as we've gone along to kind of make the case or to more generalize the target of this white paper. So as of right now, we're kind of done with this, the first bullet point of this summary of requirements, but we are working on the second bullet point here to come up with pointers to available resources to help manufacturers achieve their goals. So right now, the white paper lives on ELISA's GitHub site. I have the link here. We can provide it also after this meeting for those of you who want to take a look at it. For the time being, as I mentioned, for this last kind of second half of this meeting, I'd like to go through a few specific questions that I have, things in the white paper that are still missing, and ask the group, have an open discussion on where some of this information, where some of this information can be obtained, and we can add reference to that in the white paper. So right now, this is just kind of a shot of the front page of the white paper. I'm not planning on going through the white paper right now with the group. As I mentioned, I wanted to take a little bit of a different approach with this update, with this in this workshop, this particular virtual workshop. In the past few ones, I've been doing the same update, but really haven't, the update hasn't really facilitated further completion of this white paper. So I'm looking to maybe use this time a little bit more usefully, in a more useful fashion, to see if can get some additional contribution from some of the people that are involved with ELISA. So I'm going to have a few different bullet points, and I'm going to go through them one by one. And I really would like, and I would really welcome participation from the attendees to give some ideas of where some of this information can be obtained. So envision, for example, that you are building a safety application and you are planning on using Linux in your safety application. So if you were in that situation, my first question is, where would you get information about the version of Linux that you are using? Where would you go to get that information? Either the version, the build, or the configuration? Again, the answer might seem obvious to you, so don't, please feel free to speak up. Again, I'm not from the Linux community so much, so even if the answer seems obvious, please feel free to speak up.
There is a command called uname. So if you give uname -a, it will give you all the details about what kind of things you are using, the version.
Okay. Now let's say, for example, you were to get Linux, a copy of Linux online from the repository. Is there a way to obtain, or is there like a file that is produced when you configure, for example, what parts of Linux you want in that, basically as part of that download? Is there a way to get that information or a file to look at?
Do you mean to find out the version after downloading?
Sure.
Yes, you can see the make file will contain the version.
Okay.
And is there any other file? No, I don't think so. No.
Okay.
So if you open the make file, the make file will have the version, patch level, and sub level.
Okay.
And it will also have an extra version if it is the RC releases.
Jason, are you talking about the one that's installed on your system to be able to take a look?
Yeah.
Okay, so if you go to /boot, for example, if you have Ubuntu, you will have a config file, current config file that you can check for each release. That's one way to find out. And then other distros have saved config file in different places. But if it's Ubuntu running, then you will see it at /boot.
Okay.
Current configuration will be there. current configuration, meaning they usually tag the configuration with the release and then any kind of sub release, if RC1 or whatnot.
Okay. Any other comments on this? All right.
So I have a comment.
Oh
I
yeah,
just
please go ahead.
in the chat. So you can also get the kernel configuration that is running in your system from the proc virtual file system. So you can recompile this kernel and you can produce exactly the same image based on that.
Okay. Yeah, I'm reading the chat now, so thank you for those of you who are putting your comments there. Thank you so much. Yes, thank you. And okay, let me just check time. Okay, we've got about 11 minutes left. I'm going to move on to the next topic. Okay. Again, some of these answers might seem obvious to you, but coming from just knowing that I don't really have much background in Linux, I would like to ask the group, okay, where would you go if you needed information on how to use Linux? For example, an information for use or a user manual. Where would you go?
The man pages. Every command will have a man page, which will give you the details of how to use the command.
I would go one more step. I would do the cscope C tag on the specific tag of the source and check it out, what's going on.
I think I heard somebody speaking in the background. It was really quiet.
Can you define what you mean by use Linux? What kind of user are you referring to? I think it has different answers.
So hold on one moment. I'm sorry. So like, I mean, if I were just in, obviously Linux is very, very complex, and you can dedicate an entire semester class to how to use Linux. But just generally speaking, if I wanted to do self-study and self-learn how to use Linux, where could I go? Well, even if it's just like books or like an online repository, where could I go?
But as what? As a system administrator, as a developer, as a user, as a gamer, as what kind of use?
As I mentioned, if you were developing a safety application, you wanted to use Linux in your safety application, where could you go to find out how to use Linux in that context?
Well, I guess POSIX standard.
There's the John Corbett, Greg Cole Hartman book on their Linux programming interface.
Okay.
May I say something?
Yes, of course.
I think this is a too big question. Linux is too big. Nobody can answer exactly what you mean. You have to specify what you want to use Linux, you want to develop Linux, or you want to. Yeah, there's too much variation, and so I think it's very hard to give you a direct, easy answer to where we start. Or right.
Okay.
I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, I'm coming from. Yeah, I understand. I'm coming from a certification background, and these are all things that the certification standards would ask for. And
yes.
So I understand that there's a little bit of a disconnect, and I understand that Linux is absolutely huge. So and so I mean, maybe I should go ahead.
We might need to define some scopes and the exact extra what detail modules or whatever inside the Linux to relate to the target. Linux is just too broader scope, I
Okay.
believe.
Yeah,
Maybe this
understood.
answer would help.
Yeah.
On ELISA.tech website, Philip Ullman is making a list of reading materials. And
Yeah,
one of
okay.
the topics is Linux.
Perfect. Okay, that actually is something I'll look into, and I probably should. One thing that I think need to do a better job of is interfacing with other projects or other like tasks that are happening within ELISA. That's a really good point. Thank you, John. I will definitely take note of that.
As with a lot of documentation on ELISA, knowing that it exists doesn't mean that you can find it.
I would like also to add something. As you said, I mean, and the other speakers, we have to define what we mean about the information, how to use Linux. For example, we can separate whether we want to develop something like in the kernel space, or regarding we would like to use some user space feature that will need some configuration or some support from the Linux kernel. And for those are different answers. For example, the man pages, usually they specify the API or the commands we can use from the user space side. While if you're interested in something inside the Linux kernel, then there are different sets of resources that you have to look at.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Sorry, I'm just taking notes. Thank you. And I'm also keeping an eye on the chat window. Again, I really appreciate all of your feedback on this. I'm taking note of all of this stuff. I think the information about Linux interfaces is probably going to be similar and obtained in the same or similar places that we've been talking about. So I'm going to actually skip that item.
Sorry, Alessandro speaking. Can I add a comment? So as far as I understand, probably into the call, there are a lot of people, a lot of developer or system architects, something like that. So probably it could be better for the first question if you clarify the intent. I can guess your intent. Probably you plan to write into the white paper something like, okay, if you want to use the Linux for a safe application, you have compulsory to consult this kind of documentation, be sure to be understood something here, something there. So probably is that. So if you clarify better your intent in filling the white paper with those information, maybe that will help to collect the information as well.
Understood. Okay. Yes,
Yeah,
thank you.
I got the wrong reference on the Linux programming interface, and I put the link to it on the chat.
Okay, great. Thanks, John. All right. How many items, how many more questions? I've got a few more. We've only got like 3-4 minutes, so I don't want to go over too long. I guess the one other question that I would like maybe, and I think, John, your suggestion to look at the information that Philip is compiling, I think that's really, really good. Does anyone know if anyone has ever, and this is, and even if just a high level, done kind of an FMEA, like a failure mode effects analysis or a fault tree analysis of Linux? And I know that we're actually trying to do something similar to this in the medical devices group with STPA. Is anyone aware of any other activities similar to this?
Yes, Mobileye did FMEA on parts of Linux, and we are actually sharing or planning to share this information within ELISA at some point in time. I think in the near future, but.
Fantastic. Okay, that's definitely something I would be interested in keeping an eye on and being aware of. I really appreciate your comment there. Thank you.
Yeah, and also I think earlier today there were some talks from other working groups that they have mentioned such activities, or I mean a limited scope of those activities, like if I'm not wrong, the automotive group or the safety group.
The architecture working group.
Yeah.
Is doing an FDA
also,
on
I
the
think there were
watchdog.
On the watchdog. Okay.
There were pointers also to other activities that were related, like the automotive grade Linux and the seal to Linux MP. So probably in those projects they have done something similar.
Yep. Okay. We've just got 2 minutes left. I just have one other question. And I'll just, how about, is there a repository of known bugs or issues with Linux or specific distributions or whatnot? Is that something that's commonly, that information commonly assembled or compiled somewhere?
For upstream Linux, there is Bugzilla. For distros, they have their own bug reporting system. There is a recent effort to having a mailing list which will be collecting all the bug reports which are being sent by email. I just saw the mail a few days back, so that should be up by now.
All right, great, thank you. We are just about out of time. Any other last comments before we wrap up? And again, I really appreciate everyone typing in their feedback into the chat window as well. All right.
So the list of I typed in the list of open bugs, but I think the problem would be to analyze those bugs to understand which are relevant or
yeah, which are legitimate,
or which could affect safety. Yeah, that's.
Yeah.
I mean, just having the list. I mean, the list is there and it's huge, but the question is what we do with this list.
Yeah,
we looked into that at some point. Into the quality of the reports in those bug trackers. And well, let's just say there's a reason why most distributions more or less ignore their own bug trackers.
All right, so we are just about out of time. I don't remember if there's a break after this or not, but I really appreciate everyone's feedback. This was more useful than the last few updates that I did for this white paper. So again, thank you very much. Look forward to seeing everybody in other updates and whatnot. Thanks again, everybody.